everybody, I'm Ravital, the founder and CEO of Sunscreen, and today we'll be looking at how you can use threshold FHE to reimagine trust assumptions in CeFi as well as DeFi. So what actually comes to mind when you hear the words CeFi and DeFi? If you've been in the space for a while, you might think of Coinbase when you hear CeFi and Uniswap when you hear DeFi. But what actually distinguishes DeFi from CeFi? On the more obvious side, when you hear DeFi, you obviously expect there to be minimal trust assumptions, meaning that we as a user don't have to trust any single party for correct execution or maintenance of the protocol itself. But we probably expect a few other qualities as well. We expect the protocol to be permissionless, meaning that there's no KYC and anyone in theory can participate. And we also expect the protocol to be self-custodial, meaning we as the user retain control over our own funds. If we think about Uniswap and Coinbase, it's pretty easy to see that Uniswap satisfies all three of these conditions, whereas Coinbase fails all three of them. But is the distinction between CeFi and DeFi actually that straightforward nowadays? What if we look at two more recent protocols, specifically Uniswap X and Fireblocks off-exchange? If we look at Uniswap X, at first glance, it certainly appears to be a DeFi protocol. There's no KYC, it's self-custodial, but if you look a bit more closely, you'll realize that certain parts of it require permission from the Uniswap team itself. Fireblocks, on the other hand, with their off-exchange product, it certainly appears to be a CeFi product. There's KYC, it's permissioned, but if you look more closely, you'll realize it actually distributes trust across a number of parties. So what would you consider these protocols? Are they CeFi or are they DeFi? If a centralized entity like the Uniswap team vets participants, does that automatically make something CeFi? If a product distributes trust across multiple parties like Fireblocks off-exchange, does that automatically make something DeFi? To make matters more complicated, what happens if we introduce threshold cryptography into the mix? Will it change how we think about CeFi as well as DeFi? We believe the answer is yes, and threshold cryptography will allow us to reduce trust assumptions in CeFi while also bringing better privacy to DeFi users. Auctions are core to finance, so we'll see how to reimagine the simplest type of auction using threshold FHE. So a first price sealed bid auction works exactly the way you would expect it to. There is a bidding phase in which participants submit bids. These remain hidden from all of the other participants. And then in the second phase, a winner is declared, and the winner is, of course, whoever placed the highest bid. There are two naive ways in which to implement a first price sealed bid auction. The first way is what I would call the CeFi route. And the participants there submit their bids directly to some trusted party, which we'll call the auctioneer. In option B, which is the DeFi option, we follow a commit and reveal approach so that the bidders submit bids, they remain hidden during the bidding phase, and to determine the winner, they simply reveal their bids to everyone else. There are issues with both of these options. The issue with option A, the CeFi option, is pretty obvious, and it's that the participants have to trust the auctioneer won't misuse the bid information or incorrectly declare the winner. The issue for option B, though, is a lot more subtle, and it has to do with the fact that participants reveal their bids to everyone else. What happens if users are regularly bidding in auctions? Whether it's for MEV or trading, it ends up that over time, other folks can learn that particular user's strategy. So how might we get around this problem using threshold FHE? As a quick overview, FHE is an extension of public key cryptography where, in addition to being able to generate keys, encrypt data, decrypt data, you can now run arbitrary computer programs directly over the encrypted data itself. But when we normally talk about FHE, it's single key, meaning a single party has access to the secret key. When we talk about threshold FHE, the idea is to distribute trust across n parties. We do that by taking the secret key, breaking it up into n shares, and then distributing it to those n parties. The nice aspect of threshold FHE is that we don't need all n of those parties to return. We'll only need t out of n of them to actually decrypt. So how does threshold FHE differ from single key FHE? On the user side, in terms of the end-to-end user experience, I would say there is no real change. It looks basically the same as using single key FHE. The user may notice some slowdown from the threshold decryption process because that will take a little bit longer than single key decryption. On the privacy side, threshold FHE enables private shared state, and the high-level idea there is that the user inputs, which are the program inputs, remain private to all, including those on the threshold committee, whereas the program output is made public to the threshold committee and can be made public to everyone else as well. Where things tend to get a bit more complicated has less to do with the privacy side of threshold FHE and more to do with the trust assumptions behind the technology itself. So there are two main things that can go wrong when you use threshold FHE. Situation A is that the threshold committee members decrypt data they aren't actually supposed to be decrypting. Situation B is that the committee members just refuse to decrypt data or go offline. So what actually happens when we pick different t and n values? We did something super simple, so just looking at n equals 3. In the 2 out of 3 situation, that means 2 people need to return to decrypt. The obviously nice aspect about that is if any single member goes offline, there's no real issue. The downside is we really need an honest majority, specifically an honest supermajority. Otherwise, 2 members can just decrypt whatever data they want. In the 3 out of 3 scenario, which is called a full threshold, the nice aspect about that is that we really only need a single honest party to prevent bad decryptions. Bad here meaning decrypting data we're not supposed to be decrypting. The downside of a full threshold is that if any single member goes offline, we're basically screwed. We have no way to recover the program output. The good news about threshold FHE is that whoever sets up the protocol can actually pick what t and n values are most appropriate. So they can configure it in theory to be whatever they want. 2 out of 3, 51 out of 100, 3 out of 4. But you do need to think quite carefully about what the use case requires. So is this some sort of long-running use case that's going to take days, months, years? What kind of performance and latency do you need for your application? And of course, if threshold committee members act poorly, what's the worst that can happen with the user data? So how do you actually incorporate threshold FHE into an auction? The new workflow for a first-priced sealed bid auction will now look like the following. Whoever sets up the auction will be responsible for selecting the t and n values and, of course, determining who sits on the committee. We'll then generate the threshold FHE keys. The private key will now be split up into those n shares and distributed amongst the n committee members. During the bidding phase, participants encrypt their bids and submit them. Threshold committee members can run the auction program directly over the encrypted bids themselves. And finally, the threshold committee can decrypt the program output to figure out what the winning bid value is and who placed the winning bid. So we actually implemented a threshold FHE auction. You can access it at demo.sunscreen.tech. Unfortunately, you can't do it via mobile because you need MetaMask. It is currently integrated with Sepolia as well. So the workflow looks roughly like the following. The user connects via MetaMask. They then have to put up some stake to participate in the auctions. This is a one-time process. They will then submit their encrypted bids, which will go directly to the threshold committee members. The committee waits to receive all the encrypted bids and then runs the auction program directly over the encrypted bids. This will be done off-chain. The committee decrypts to figure out who the winner of the auction is. They notify all the participants, and then whoever the winner is needs to now pay out their winning bid or risk having their stake being slashed. So we have screenshots of the demo here, and we're going to walk you through it. So of course, you now connect via MetaMask. You put up your stake. How you select stake is very much outside the scope of this talk. You can either have it under collateralized or over collateralized, depending on what you think is most appropriate for the application. We chose to go with under collateralization. The user then places their bid. For simplicity and performance reasons, we have selected the bid to be between 5 million to 7 million Gwei. So you put in your bid, you send it off. In this situation, we're imagining that somebody else has won this auction. So you're able to now click the green box, see who placed the highest bid and which participant number it was. In the situation in which you won the auction, you will now have to pay out whatever your winning bid value is. You will pay via MetaMask. We have chosen to give users a 10-second timeout window, so they will need to pay out their bid within 10 seconds. If your bid is not paid out in time, your stake will be appropriately slashed, and you can view that transaction on-chain. Once your stake is slashed, you obviously can't continue participating in auctions because we don't want you to essentially spam the auction. So you'll now have to put up a new stake to continue participating. There are a couple things to note with our application. The first is that there are no ZKPs at all in this demo. Losing bids should never be revealed. For demonstration purposes, we do allow people to click on the other boxes and see what bids were placed during the auction, but that would not be how it's actually implemented in a real-life situation. We have set it up so that the encrypted bids go directly to the threshold committee members. There is, in theory, nothing stopping you from posting it on some public ledger, but that introduces a further slowdown that we don't think is worth accepting. Finally, we do choose to run the program off-chain, and that's to control for performance. So you'll see in a second that you need a fairly beefy machine to get any performance a user is happy with waiting for. So in terms of the benchmarks itself, our demo is using a 2 out of 3 scheme, but explaining the numbers gets complicated very quickly depending on regions that the parties are in. For reference, what we did was 2 out of 3 with everybody sitting in the same region, which was AWS West. These benchmarks are for single key FHE, specifically our variant of the TFHE scheme. To run an auction with 93 bids and 21-bit precision, you can do it on a 64-core machine in about 2.1 seconds. If you're using a consumer laptop like what I have, it's around 8.5 seconds, so pretty unpleasant. There is no GPU acceleration today, and there's actually a number of interesting parameters to play around with. So our auction is also set up to be 80-bit secure. If you want a more secure auction, so say 128 bits, you're going to pay a performance penalty for that. Another interesting thing to think about is what sort of precision do you need for the computation. We have gone with 21 bits to get max performance, and as you get lower and lower in terms of bits, you can get better and better performance. Finally, an interesting thing with TFHE is the error rate itself. So depending on what error rate you're okay with, you can get better and better performance. And what that means in practice is that you're going to get the wrong answer out of the computation. If you're okay with the 1 in a trillion error rate, you can get even better performance than what we have here. In terms of the road ahead, there's a couple interesting things to think about. We only focus on confidentiality, which is hiding the inputs and outputs of a program. There is nothing here with anonymity and hiding user identity. What other privacy techniques can you incorporate to provide better privacy for the user, like anonymity? In this demo, we have the committee run the FHE program. There is no need for them to do so. In theory, you could separate out the duties so that the threshold committee only does threshold decryption, and there are some set of validators who run the FHE computation. And finally, there's a natural tension between decentralization and performance. How many people need to sit on the threshold committee in order to be decentralized? Is it 20 like Wormhole, or are we talking 50 or 100? So we couldn't help but ask ourselves in building out this application, is our threshold FHE auction CeFi or DeFi? But does the distinction actually matter? Thank you. And if you'd like to try out our demo, it's at demo.sunscreen.tech, and you can learn more about us by scanning the QR code.
Great.